If you think the only real way to fix this is another expensive product with a countdown clock printed right on the packaging, that's not actually true, and I spent years and more money than I want to admit proving myself wrong the hard way. The thing that actually worked wasn't a product at all. It was something sitting in my own kitchen the entire time. I'm 83, and the thing that actually worked was something I nearly dismissed as too ordinary to matter. In the next few minutes, I'll tell you exactly what it was. These days, I have far less discomfort than I did during those years of chasing one product after another, and I've stopped feeling like I need to hide the drawer of failed attempts from my own wife, who watched me buy most of them without saying much. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because what finally worked wasn't another expensive product chase. It was something sitting in my own kitchen the entire time. I'd tried things I'm not entirely proud of. Expensive supplements ordered from late-night television ads, a device I saw advertised online that I won't even describe here. None of it worked, and most of it just made me feel more foolish about the whole situation than I'd felt before I started. By the time I got to the point of trying something as plain as quercetin, I'd already spent more money than I want to admit on products that did absolutely nothing. Each failed attempt made the next one feel more hopeless before I'd even opened the bottle, a kind of accumulated skepticism that made trying anything new feel almost pointless. I remember one product specifically, ordered from a late-night infomercial that promised results within a week, guaranteed. I counted down those 7 days with a kind of desperate hope I'm not proud of, checking each morning for a change that never came. When the week ended with nothing different, I didn't even feel angry anymore, just tired, the particular exhaustion of having believed something one more time against my own better judgment. I nearly gave up looking entirely after that one. Some part of me had started to wonder whether the actual problem was simply unfixable, and that every promise out there, however confident, was ultimately selling the same false hope in a different package. There's a particular kind of exhaustion in that cycle, separate from the original symptom entirely. It's not just disappointment about your body anymore, it's a quiet embarrassment about your own judgment, about falling for the same kind of promise again and again, each time telling yourself, against all the accumulated evidence, that this one would somehow be different. I hid most of those purchases from my own wife for longer than I'm proud to admit, tucking bottles into a bathroom drawer she rarely opened, embarrassed not just by the symptom itself, but by how many times I'd been willing to pay for hope that never delivered. Looking back, I think that secrecy cost me almost as much as the money did. Here's what I eventually learned, after all that chasing. Flavonoids, a category of plant compounds found in ordinary foods, have documented anti-inflammatory properties, and inflammation plays a real, measurable role in bladder discomfort and urinary symptom severity. Most of what I'd tried before targeted the wrong thing entirely, or promised to fix everything at once with no mechanism attached, which should have been my first clue that something was off. That mismatch between promise and mechanism is exactly what reframed everything for me. A result without a mechanism attached is exactly the kind of thing that should raise suspicion, even when you're tired and desperate enough to ignore that instinct. Real physiology doesn't work in overnight miracles, and something I could actually explain the why behind felt fundamentally different from everything I'd tried before it. For 11 years, the bathroom ran my nights. Up at midnight, up at 2, up again at 5, a weak little stream each time and never quite empty. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, knowing I'd drag through the next day half awake. I thought it was just age. It wasn't. Here's what no one ever sat me down to explain. The prostate crowds the channel your urine runs through, so the bladder never fully drains, it just fills right back up within the hour. That's why you go and go again. It was never weakness. It was never getting old. And the pills they kept handing me, they left me dizzy every time I stood, gave me that strange, dry finish where almost nothing came, and the nights never changed. But there is a gentle way to help that bladder empty the way it's meant to, without any of that. At 83, I finally sleep through the night again. I'll show you exactly what in this video, and if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. So here's what actually worked. Quercetin, a flavonoid found in onions, apples, and tea, taken as a modest daily habit rather than an expensive supplement regimen. The compound has documented anti-inflammatory properties, and inflammation of the lower urinary tract is increasingly recognized as a real contributor to symptom severity, separate from the purely mechanical obstruction most treatments focus on exclusively. I want to be honest that the evidence here is emerging rather than a single dramatic clinical trial. This is a real, defensible mechanism rather than a miracle claim, and I'm presenting it exactly that way. What convinced me wasn't a flashy promise. It was the fact that I could actually explain why it might help, in plain physiological terms, something none of the expensive failed attempts before it had ever offered me. I started simply. Red onion in my dinner most nights, a cup of tea in the evening instead of another coffee, an apple most afternoons. Nothing expensive, nothing that required a special order from overseas, nothing with a countdown clock attached to the packaging. I added a couple of other pieces around it. Less alcohol in the evening, since it's a separate irritant working against the same comfort I was trying to support. Better sleep generally, since a well-rested body seems to manage inflammation more efficiently across every system, this one included. I gave the whole combination close to 2 months before I trusted the change was real, learning finally, after all those failed attempts, that real physiology takes real time, and that judging something after a disappointing week had never once served me well. That patience was the hardest part, honestly. Years of chasing quick fixes had trained me to expect immediate results or nothing at all, and unlearning that particular expectation took almost as much effort as building the actual habit did in the first place. I caught myself more than once Googling the same skeptical questions I should have asked years earlier about every other product, and finding, this time, actual answers grounded in real physiology instead of another glossy testimonial. Somewhere around week 5, I caught myself doing the same countdown I used to do with the infomercial products, checking each morning for a dramatic change. I had to consciously stop myself and remember that this wasn't that kind of claim. The evidence I'd read had been honest about a gradual timeline, and holding it to the same unrealistic standard as the products that had failed me before would have been its own quiet unfairness. That single realization, catching myself mid-habit, felt like the first real sign I'd actually learned something from all those years of disappointment. By week 7, the discomfort had eased enough that I genuinely stopped thinking about it most days, which is a strange thing to notice since the absence of a symptom rarely announces itself the way its presence does. It took my wife pointing it out, actually, before I consciously registered how different things had become. She said I'd stopped shifting in my chair the way I used to during long dinners, a small habit I hadn't even realized I'd dropped until she named it out loud, sitting right across the table from me. My wife and I spent a quiet evening in a few weeks ago, nothing planned, just dinner and conversation, and there wasn't a trace of the old discomfort I used to quietly manage through evenings like that. She actually commented, unprompted, that I'd seemed more comfortable lately in general, not in any one specific moment. I think about a man named Delbert, who wrote in, 68, who told me he'd spent almost as much as I had on products that never delivered, always drawn to whatever promised the most dramatic result. He said learning that the thing which actually worked was something this ordinary, something he'd been eating his whole life without ever connecting it to this part of his health, was almost harder to accept than another expensive failure would have been. Delbert told me he'd actually kept a running tally of everything he'd spent over the years chasing a fix, and seeing the number written down, compared to the cost of a bag of onions and a box of tea, was its own kind of humbling realization. He also told me about his own version of the 7-day infomercial promise, a different product with the same false urgency, and how he'd counted down those days the exact same anxious way I had. He said comparing our two stories, nearly identical down to the specific emotional shape of the disappointment, made him wonder how many men are quietly running the exact same cycle in isolation, each one assuming his own gullibility was somehow unique. If you're on medication for your prostate, your blood pressure, or your heart, please hear this clearly. Nothing here replaces your treatment, and you should never stop or change a medication on your own. Mention any new supplement or significant dietary change to your doctor first, every time, no matter how ordinary or low stakes it seems. What I want you to walk away with is this. After trying things I wasn't proud of, what actually worked was the most ordinary thing on the entire list. Not because it's magic, but because it addresses a real mechanism instead of promising to fix everything overnight with nothing to explain why. I think that's the real lesson buried inside all those wasted years and wasted dollars. The loudest promises are almost always the least trustworthy, and the quietest, most ordinary explanations, grounded in something you can actually understand, are usually the ones worth your time. I've since become the kind of person who reads past the headline claim on anything, looking specifically for the word why. Why would this actually work, in plain physiological terms, rather than just a testimonial and a countdown timer? It's a small habit of skepticism that cost me years to build, but one I wish I'd developed decades earlier than I actually did. So here's what I use: a few drops every single morning. And let me be honest about why it works. One herb on its own nudges one thing, but your prostate answers best when several signals are calmed at the same time: the flow, the emptying, the pressure behind it. That's why what I take brings them together, concentrated, working as one, not a single ingredient hoping to do everything. Stronger stream, full emptying, quiet nights, your freedom back. And none of the trade-offs, no dizziness, no dry finish, nothing taken from you as a man. It's linked right under this video. Go see it for yourself. It won't replace good sleep or your own doctor. It's there to support your body. At 83, I sleep through. It is not too late for you. I think about the man I was, chasing one disappointing product after another, more embarrassed each time, hiding bottles in a drawer his own wife never opened. And I think about the man I am now, 83 years old, who finally found something ordinary that actually does what it claims, sitting quietly in his own kitchen the entire time, never once requiring an infomercial or a countdown timer to work. If you've ever tried something you weren't proud of, hoping desperately it would finally be the answer, only to be let down again, tell me about it in the comments below. And if ordinary, honest explanations are what you're after instead of another miracle claim, go ahead and subscribe. There's more of this ahead, every single week, and I genuinely read every comment myself, infomercial confessions very much included.